According to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, the United States conveyed a 15-point plan to Iran through Pakistan to end the war, including a one-month ceasefire and the elimination of Iran's nuclear capabilities. In response, Iran put forward 5 conditions. First, the immediate closure of all American military bases in the Persian Gulf. Second, binding guarantees of refraining from further strikes. Third, the cessation of Israeli operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Fourth, the lifting of absolutely all sanctions from Iran. And finally, what you'd call the cherry on top, the U.S. paying reparations for the damage caused. It feels like Iran won the war, defeated America, and practically occupied it, almost all of it. And now Iran is setting conditions. If you agree to them, we'll let the remaining Americans live. And the U.S. is preparing for face-to-face negotiations in Islamabad already on Thursday, March the 26th. What a wonderful way to communicate, shouting to the whole world just for the sake of it, just for your own pleasure. Because, of course, none of this has any real connection to reality. Everything stated officially in the communiqué means Iran has nothing to do with it. Their fleet has been destroyed. Their air force has been destroyed. Radars and almost all air defense systems have been destroyed. American planes are flying calmly without any fear, even refueling in the air right over Iran. I wonder, does the Iranian leadership really think they can fool someone with statements like that? Or do they think that by doing this, they're showing their unbreakable stance? Overall, it really feels like one group is negotiating with someone, while someone completely different is making statements. It's quite funny that the EU, the European Union, promised to send ships to protect shipping, but only after the fighting is over. So what's the point of these ships then for, let's say, protecting shipping? I think they're just waiting for the U.S. The U.S. will promise to send weapons for, the protection of Ukraine after the military actions in Ukraine are over. British planes have already entered Iranian airspace, right? The coalition that's planning to act against Iran has grown from 23 to 30 members. So what exactly are they planning to do, right? But of course, the most interesting thing is that in the very near future, Iran's neighbors will join the fighting. But on which side and under what conditions, they are putting forward their own terms, and we'll talk about that with you a bit later. The U.S. State Department is developing an online portal that will allow, and you'll be very pleased to hear this, residents of Europe whose freedom has been taken away, and people from other countries as well, if they wish, to view content banned by the European Union. Sounds good? Washington sees this as a fight against censorship. In European countries, Europeans might even go as far as to jam the voice of America, yes, in this case, on the internet. U.S. Vice President Vance stated at the Munich Security Conference that the main threat to Europe is not Russia, not China, but censorship within Europe itself. And I absolutely agree with him on that. I completely agree with him. Based on the data, Freedom House, the top 5 countries with the strictest internet censorship, still do not include any European countries. These are Belarus, Russia, Iran, China, and some country called Myanmar. I think that's what it's called. I apologize to the people of Myanmar if I offended you, but honestly, this is the first time in my life I've heard or read about Myanmar. So, Russia, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, has been consistently tightening control over the information space. Iran, a country with one of the most extensive internet blocking systems, finds itself at the epicenter of a war where information control, of course, plays a key role. There, let's say, it's clear, at least that's understandable. It's not accepted in any way, it's not welcomed, but when it comes to Europe, it's just mind-boggling. On the night of March 24th to 25th, Russia launched, by the way, about 400 drones and dozens of missiles across Ukraine. Now, according to a Reuters poll, Trump's approval rating has dropped. So because of the war, me, you, down to 36%. This is a new low for his second term. At the beginning of the term, it was 47 then. For several months, it stayed at 40, and now, well, this has dropped even further because about 59 to 60% of Americans do not approve of the war with Iran. That is, they just don't support it. They understand it. A Wall Street Journal poll showed that 31% support Trump's economic policy, which is also very low, and 53% believe that he is overly focused on foreign policy. Well, you could say that this criticism has been directed at him for a couple of months now. So, March 25 of this year went down in history as the day when 3 wars, active ones in the Middle East and positional ones in Ukraine, were ongoing, and the diplomatic struggle over the future of the free world became entangled in a single knot of contradictions. The outcome of each of them will actually determine the shape of the global order for decades to come. But perhaps the 2 most interesting topics today are Russia's and China's reactions to the ongoing military actions in the Middle East. An extraordinary reaction, gentlemen. Don't think you've guessed it. And also how the Democrats in California were caught red-handed, simply caught, during a massive fraud. I promise you'll enjoy it. But let's start with the reasons why Russia wants the military actions in the Middle East to stop immediately. Along the way, I'll tell you about the results of increasing taxes on the rich, which have already hit one state. As they say in Russia, it's like getting hit on the head with a stick, not a banana in the nose. And now they're expecting those very rich people to flee from the Democrat-run state. I mean, it's already happening, but now with all the new tricks going on in California and New York, it's just going to increase. It's enough for 2% of the population to leave, but those 2%, half of them or more, are the people who fund the budget. They pay so much money into the budget that it's possible to afford social programs here. All right, we'll talk about this a bit later. I listened to commentators who said that it's incredibly beneficial for Russia if oil doesn't go through Hormuz. That means Russia is making huge money from this, that the complete halt of supplies from both Venezuela and Iran will give it a unique status and the ability to dictate its own terms and earn huge profits at the same time. I think that's a superficial view. And today, the Russian Federation, through Peskov, told us that it wants to see an end to military actions in the Middle East, and it's practically demanding that the Iranian government sit down with the Americans to resolve this issue. Peskov's statement came after Iranian television said that Iran rejects Trump's plans, which I was telling you about. 15 points and will continue to fight the aggressor, either until the last Iranian or until the last one or until next Sunday. God knows. Why would Russia want to stop something that brings it profits? And it blocks competitors in the energy market? Let's look a little deeper. Ukraine is constantly hitting Russia's energy industry. There are ongoing issues with oil extraction, delivery, and storage within the Russian Federation. But most importantly, what is Russia afraid of? If the military actions continue, then there will be a regime change in Iran. Regime change means that Iran will have friendly relations with America and Israel, and most likely not at all friendly relations with Russia. If Iran and America reach an agreement and stop the military actions before the regime falls, then, of course, America will gain political and financial benefits from this event. Nevertheless, Iran will not become a friend of Russia, or at the very least, it will not become an enemy of Russia. One more thing. Russia really does not want this to happen for the Sunni states, led by Saudi Arabia, to join the coalition and fight on the side of Israel and America, and for them to start cooperating militarily against Iran. Saudi Arabia is putting pressure on Trump, demanding, unlike American society, to continue the war as a historic opportunity to change the regime in Iran and to change the Middle East. The Sunnis dream that Iran would change its leadership to one that is less aggressive and more inclined toward trade relations rather than fueling wars and terror in the Middle East. In the Middle East, Russia interacted with Syria, which had already switched to another camp, and with Iran. If Iran shifts its alignment, then this region will be lost for Russia as well as for China. What does all this mean? We've already gone through 2 days of speculation when all the American newspapers and probably the international press too were saying that Trump is lying, bluffing, that there are no negotiations with Iran. And even on CNN, they made a remarkable statement that they trust Iranian state television much more than the President of the United States of America. They have already apologized for that today. And also when Trump was asked, "Are you negotiating about who controls and who will control the Hormuz Strait?" he said a remarkable phrase. He said, "No, we control everything we want to control." Today it became known that an airborne brigade is being deployed to Iran.
Fox News alert the commander.
Breaking news from Fox News. The commander of the 82nd Airborne Division has just been ordered to go to the Middle East. The president intends to secure the strait and possibly seize Kark Island, the jewel of Iran. The 83rd is a light infantry airborne assault unit, usually the tip of the spear, and can be deployed anywhere in the world in less than 18 hours. Central Command has already bombed numerous targets on Kark Island. Paratroopers are expected to land at night, seize the airfields, and quickly repair the runways. They will clear the way for the Air Force and Marines to bring in more troops, armored vehicles, and equipment. It's risky, but once you control this island, you control Iran's economic lifeline. Meanwhile, more U.S. Special Forces units are being deployed to the Gulf. The recent surge of C-17 flights to the region indicates that light ground strike forces may begin operating soon. This won't be a ground war. These units are designed for precision, speed, and powerful impact. They combine elite elements from the Navy SEALs, Rangers, and Delta. Their task is to carry out the most dangerous and complex missions in the world, such as dismantling enemy networks and eliminating high-value targets. These Special Forces operatives do this with minimal trace and maximum effect. If a decisive strike is needed, these are the people who will get it done.
It seems that the plan to seize Iran's main oil export island has taken shape and been finalized. The paratroopers are not being deployed just to sit and wait to see what happens. They will sit and wait for the signal. Maybe it will come, maybe it won't. But it means the decision has been made. So there's a parachute brigade, here they call it a division, 2,500 Marines from the start, plus 4,500 Marines from California on top of that. And I have only one question. Will they seize only the island itself, or will they also simultaneously capture some points and facilities in Iran that are located on the coast along the Strait of Hormuz?
I'm not a big supporter of putting troops on the ground, not necessarily in Iran, but I am in favor of taking Karg Island and the Strait of Hormuz. Listen, we need to do it the way the Romans did.
While this elite unit is taking positions, the remnants of the Iranian army are paralyzed. We've achieved air superiority, so our B-2S are refueling in the air and continue to drop heavy ordnance, and we're getting help from the British.
B-52 bombers are now striking from RAF Fairford Air Base in Britain, carrying a full load of 24 2-ton satellite-guided bunker buster bombs. They typically need to be dropped from 515 miles from the target.
All this is happening as we enter the second day of talks with the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament. The regime is now under pressure from its last two allies. The Chinese and Russians are telling Tehran to leave the strait alone and make a deal before Trump seizes the oil.
This is exactly what China and Russia are trying to explain to the Iranian leadership, that it's necessary to give up part of it to preserve what matters most. By the way, it's interesting that Ukraine is in exactly the same situation, where the United States is trying to explain that they need to give up part of it to preserve the essentials. As you can see, neither in the Ukrainian case nor in the Iranian case, whether it's national pride, national foolishness, or, I don't know, just hot-headedness, but neither of them can make a balanced and well-thought-out decision. And most likely because of this, they will lose their countries.
Never has a modern military been so rapid.
Never before has a modern army been so quickly and decisively crushed by overwhelming firepower from the very first day. That's why we see ourselves as part of these negotiations. We are negotiating with bombs. You have a choice while we circle over Tehran, as the president said about your future. The president made it clear that you will not have nuclear weapons. The military agrees. Our job is to ensure that.
We told the mullahs that we would turn off the lights, and a few hours later they sat down at the negotiating table. Let me know after the show what you think this gift is, because I have no idea. We know the Iranians can't buy their way out of this. American objectives remain the same.
Remember, it all starts with the fact that they cannot have nuclear weapons. Simply, I said, yesterday they asked what's in the top 10. I said, well, number 1, 2, and 3. And that is, they cannot have nuclear weapons, and they will not have nuclear weapons. And that's what we're talking about. I don't want to speak too soon, but they agreed never to have nuclear weapons.
Iran has told every administration that they don't want nuclear weapons, so that's a lie. So what has changed? Now they will absolutely not be able to do anything once we confirm this. That's why Trump says he'll take all the uranium. Also, new information just came in. The New York Times reports that the Trump administration has delivered a 15-point peace plan to Iran through Pakistan. The New York Times also reports that Iran may face serious difficulties in preparing a quick response. High-ranking Iranian officials are having difficulties with internal communication, and they fear that Israel might bomb them if they gather in person. And reportedly, we have granted the Iranian speaker immunity, so no one will kill him in the next 4 or 5 days. An Israeli source reports that Trump is also demanding a complete halt to uranium enrichment. 0. So why aren't we negotiating with this new Ayatollah? Exactly, no one has seen or heard him. The Iranian people now have a new nickname for their supreme leader, Gay. Are you ready? The cardboard Ayatollah. The whole world is finally realizing the Iranian threat. Arab countries are accusing Tehran of committing terrorist acts against every country on earth. It's not just senseless drone attacks and blocking oil tankers. Iran is also blocking fertilizer supplies. Many people will go hungry if the regime doesn't surrender. They even managed to bring Saudi Arabia and Israel to a common understanding. Just imagine that. Both of these countries want regime change. The international naval convoy that was formed grew from 22 to 30 participating countries. Rubio brought them together and was almost constantly calling everyone. The British Royal Navy will lead this coalition. I hope this means that America and its allies are preparing to establish peace. J.D. Vance also took part in the negotiations with Tehran. An official White House spokesperson told Axios that the situation is fluid. If we can't reach an agreement, we'll return to bombing.
The striking thing in the history of the United States of America is that the U.S. press, which we call liberal socialist, wants Iran to win. They rejoice at any deaths of Americans, that is, their own citizens, or at any failure that puts the U.S. and Israel in a bad situation. In other words, the worse things are for the U.S., the happier the liberal socialist press is. Well, as Russians call them here, liberists. By the way, they also rejoice at the bombings of civilian neighborhoods in Jerusalem. They are happy that citizens of their own country are being killed, and that militant Islamists are destroying homes, kindergartens, hospitals, and Israel's energy supply.
We've learned that Donald Trump.
We found out that Donald Trump has been lying to Americans from the very beginning, and he continues to lie to Americans about this. So you trust Iranian officials more than the President of the United States?
I believe that based on all the available information and Donald Trump's track record.
Iranian regime leaders constantly lie. But the problem is we can't be sure our president tells the truth either.
I'm inclined to believe Iran more than Donald Trump because he can't admit the truth even when it's constantly shoved in his face.
They accused, and then reported that they were wrong, but forgot to apologize. So there weren't any negotiations, there were just talks. There were negotiating talks or talkative negotiations. Well, just wonderful.
Important urgent news is coming into the Situation Room. Now we're learning from a high-ranking Iranian source that there has been contact between the U.S. and Iran.
So, Wolf will take the cardboard Ayatollah at his word, but not the commander-in-chief. Listen, politicians lie during war. Both sides do. You have the right to doubt their words. But it's been 3 weeks already, and the Iranian army is almost destroyed, and we've set our sights on the oil. While we're talking about peace, I think things are going pretty well so far. I don't know how this will turn out, but I hope everything works out well. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon claims that if this really goes well, the benefit for America will be simply enormous.
I think that war with Iran offers the best chance in the long term, although it's probably risky in the short term. Since we don't know how a relationship like this will turn out, it's not the same relationship it was 20 years ago. They all want this. They can't have neighbors who, can launch ballistic missiles at their data centers, thinking that people will invest $10 billion in data centers.
So, the next few hours are critical. If Iran is serious about the deal, we will make it. If they refuse, Trump can seize the strait and the island, since American paratroopers are nearly there.
And now, as promised, what really happens after a state or city imposes draconian taxes on the so-called rich? Well, they're all supposedly terrible people, the rich. Everyone wants to be rich, but because they're not rich and someone else is, they say the rich are bad. Why do they impose these taxes? First of all, of course, it's to tell voters that we're taking from someone, robbing someone, stealing from someone in order to give it to you. This is done so that those who get a share of the stolen money will vote for the Democrats. And tomorrow, knowing that they committed a crime just to share with those who will vote for them. But the second thing that socialists usually propose is that if they impose more taxes on wealthy people, the Treasury will get more money. In fact, there are two types of socialists. One is scoundrels who know for sure that increasing taxes on the rich will decrease revenue, and we'll talk about that now. And the second are fools who believe that increasing taxes on the rich will increase the amount of stolen money going to the Treasury. But let's listen to what the experts have to say about this. I mean, about the law passed in Massachusetts in 2023.
How many people left the state and how much money they took with them?
We're talking about 2023 when this tax came into effect. That same year, the state lost 41,000 residents and along with them, $4.2 billion in adjusted gross income. The amount of lost income increased by 80% in a year, even though the number of taxpayers who left actually decreased. Most of that money came from wealthy people. People from the highest tax bracket in Massachusetts are responsible for 70% of the $4.2 billion that left the state. Money moves, and tax experts say it's not surprising that clearly unfavorable policies for a certain group have led to the migration of that very group.
These taxes don't make it clear that the state values or welcomes the contributions and investments of its citizens. The neutrality of the tax code is very important. It's not the job of the tax code to pick winners and losers. And in some of these cases, there's almost a punitive aspect toward earning and investing. Lawmakers should take this into account.
However, supporters argue that the tax works. So far, it has brought the state $6 billion in revenue, and in the 2026 fiscal year, receipts increased by 19%. But critics warn that it discourages entrepreneurs. That's why this November, 2 questions will be put to a vote in the state. One question will lower the state income tax from 5% to 4%, and another question on the ballot will limit how much the state's revenues can increase in a year. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey sharply criticized these 2 initiatives. She stated that they would create a multi-billion-dollar hole in the already strained state budget. But at a time when all states are looking at taxes for millionaires and billionaires, Massachusetts is an example of what happens when they are implemented.
California, New York, and Oregon keep raising taxes on those who provide the state with 70% of its budget. This has been calculated a long time ago. A small percentage of the population, I don't remember exactly how many, pays 70% of the taxes in the state budget, while the overwhelming majority of the population covers only 30% of the expenses. But the not-so-smart, or maybe insatiable, I'm not even sure what to call them, Democrats want more and more even though they know they'll be getting less. But by shouting and taking more, they win the love of the masses. And why do the masses love the Democrats? Because when they steal, they share. For example, I remember being struck in the early 90s that the mayor of Moscow, Lushkov, when he was brought a thick envelope of money, would say, besides this, you also have to build a kindergarten, lay asphalt on your street, and plant trees. That's why people loved him. I was personally present. I personally witnessed several times when people said, yes, he's a thief, people who gave him money. Of course, he's a thief, but at least while stealing, he doesn't forget about the people. Sobchak was also stealing in St. Petersburg at the same time. But he didn't demand that the city be improved. And as a result, Lushkov was loved in Moscow, even though he probably stole 100 times more than Sobchak. But Sobchak in St. Petersburg, especially after a couple of years when the initial charm started to fade a bit and a couple of years had passed under his administration. He really didn't know how to manage anything, so people didn't really love him that much. Well, all right. And now it's time to talk about a truly wonderful topic that I'm absolutely thrilled about, namely, as they say, elections in California. A truly joyful story, truly. It happened in my home state, California, where a Democrat was caught red-handed at the moment they slipped in 45,000 fake ballots. This will play a big role in the Senate fight for fair voting. Because the Democrats claim that even if there is something, somewhere, some kind of cheating, first of all, it's very small, and secondly, it doesn't affect any results. Now let's take a look. Does it affect things more or less, or does it not affect them at all?
Panic in California because of the ballots. We know that Sheriff Chad Bianco went and took them, seized the ballots after getting a search warrant, and he was allowed to do it. And now California Attorney General Rob Bonta has just filed an emergency lawsuit in the appellate court to stop the counting of the ballots.
The sheriff, who is himself running in the election, went to court and presented evidence. The court allowed him to seize about 500,000 ballots, I think even 600,000, in which, according to a number of witnesses, more than 45,000 slips were stuffed. Slips, not ballots. Slips that were not identified. Or another possibility. They say that they simply took the number 45,000 and added it to the voting results. There are 45,623. Now they're going to look into this. But the Attorney General of California, filed with the appellate court to stop the proceedings. Because he says, we also counted, and where did you get 45,000? There is a difference, yes, in 100 ballots. Even if 100 ballots were added, I think that should also be investigated, not to mention 45,000. And now let's listen to the sheriff who started all this.
Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco and your next governor. Hello, California. Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco and your future governor. Well. Political corruption in California keeps growing and growing. A disgrace to law enforcement. Attorney General Rob Bonta has just filed an emergency motion in the appellate court to stop the ballot counting in Riverside County. For those who are not aware, we are conducting an investigation regarding the alleged and potential 405,000 extra votes compared to the number of ballots cast in the special election in November 2025. Just to be clear, this is not about counting votes for or against. This is simply counting all the ballots and comparing that total number with the number of votes recorded by the Dominion machines. Simple and clear, common sense. Not only did the High Court judge approve the order to obtain the ballots, he also issued a separate ruling for their counting. Why would Rob Bonta want to stop this count unless he was afraid of what the count might reveal? We have an extremely politically biased appellate court, so it will be interesting. So what will it be? Will we allow law enforcement to count the ballots as part of a legitimate investigation, or will we stop it and sweep it under the rug? All California voters should demand transparency, not legal tricks and cover-ups. Stay with us.
Oh, we'll get there, Sheriff. You can count on that. But Colm, of course, reminded us of what was going on here. So this has been happening for quite a while. We've covered a lot of back and forth letters, and here's something else about this story from The Hill. They say Sheriff Chad Bianco is running for governor. Он видит более полумиллиона бюллетеней. 650,000, it seems, since the November special elections. And of course, this was about redistricting in California to push through Democratic districts and get seats in Congress for the midterm elections. So this is serious. There will be a lot of consequences if we prove real problems or fraud. When they stuffed another 45,000 votes, he said his investigation was prompted by a local election group. They say the results literally differed by almost 50,000. This group was studying the difference between the handwritten ballot logs and the total number of votes reported to the state, right? That's why we fill out these forms. That's why we maintain the chain of custody, to follow the trail. Who counted? When did they do it? Who are they accountable to? And then you can compare and cross-check. You can verify it. You can check all the forms and see who's lying. So Rob Bonta and Art Tanoka, who is the registrar of voters in Riverside County, say the difference wasn't 45,000, here's their number. Only 100 votes. And that's the whole difference. I'd say that's a small discrepancy. So the measure was approved in the county by more than 80,000 votes, and here we hear it again. That's not enough to change the margin of error. Bianco defended his actions, saying that it has nothing to do with his company. I don't think so. This is basically a fact-finding mission. We don't even want to count who was for or against, who voted. That's not even part of the conversation. It's about the number of ballots that were collected. The investigation is simple. We will physically recount the ballots and compare the result with the total number of registered voters. The California Sheriff and the Registrar of Voters state that 611,000 ballots were submitted, but now 657,000 votes are registered and confirmed to the Secretary of State. That's a huge number. And if something like this can happen in one county, well, in one county in California, and in all the other counties, 45,000 votes. Remember in 2020 in Arizona, the difference between Biden's victory and Trump's results was about 12,000. The same in Fulton County, 11,800. And now it's 40,000, and these counties are much bigger than, I think, Riverside. I could be wrong, but that's just one county. Imagine this all across America. It's crazy.
Riverside County really isn't that big. In California, there are actually 58 counties. Some are much bigger than the others. Actually, some are much smaller. If in 58 counties there was an average fraud of 45,000, that's 2.6 million fake ballots. But the most interesting thing, of course, is that all of this is centralized, and it has one very precise, reusable, stated idea. It's called changing the regime, as they call it, of Trump in the United States of America. By that, they mean by any means necessary, legal, illegal, by lying, by robbery, by murder, by anything at all, but to overthrow the current government and hand it over to the socialists. Well, that is, to the good people.
Now, Bonta, this is the AG's office. Attorney General Bonta's office says this action violated his directives, which of course only encourages fraud and undermines the state's ability to control the investigation, which is the main goal. Robbie. The petition notes the Attorney General still hasn't received the full case file and doesn't know if a special administrator was appointed or if any recount resumed. We're already hearing reports of a special administrator being appointed, but Rob Bonta opposes it. The statement cites his public comments as evidence that the sheriff is conducting a broad investigation of facts, rather than investigating a clearly defined crime. The petition quotes Bianca's words. The investigation is intended to prove the accuracy of the election just as much as to disprove it. And this statement is described as evidence that the sheriff is not conducting a traditional criminal case. He's just trying to draw attention to, well, 45,000 extra votes, and this is the Attorney General, right? Shouldn't he be concerned about this claim? Why isn't he investigating this? Why didn't he go seize the ballots and start counting them? We know why. But here is this shocking video. And in this case, she explains it very clearly. Jennifer Rubin and others are saying it out loud. Here, listen. The brainwashed minion of Norm Eisen, a certain Jennifer Rubin, said the truth out loud. They are using color revolution tactics to overthrow Trump 2.0. What does that mean? Regime change, you understand. Many people have focused abroad on that regime. But what about this regime they're trying to overthrow? That is, the legitimately elected administration they don't want to allow to govern. They tried this with Trump 1.0, we went through that. We all went through the Mueller report, the Russia collusion hoax, the letter about the laptop. Trump was tried 4 times. They declared war on the participants of January 6 and anyone even remotely connected to Trump 1.0. This is the real conspiracy. This is what these people were hiding. That's why they don't want the elections to be examined more closely. Norm, this guy who is actually the inspiration behind much of this, steps in when she acknowledges Jennifer Ruby. She admits we're working to overthrow the regime. That's how these people talk, as we've explained. Politicians are like addicts. They'll rob and betray you. They'll do anything to keep their power. That's how they work. Meanwhile, Republicans seem unsure. The SAVE Act sounds pretty complicated. You know, it's Easter now, so we need to go home. And honestly, we don't really want to work on this because John Thune says it's politically impossible. Thanks, John. Meanwhile, these people are sharpening their knives to cut your throat. That's what Norm Eisen said in this very short podcast clip on The Contrarian. Not many people really watch it, but they just like to talk among themselves.
We support regime change here at home, and in November, we'll start the process. It's time to throw out all these slackers. We are for...
Yes, regime change is peaceful and legal. Yes, they exploit the law. They use the laws against us. Nobody acts that way, and the government shouldn't allow the system to be rigged for personal gain. Aren't there supposed to be good faith participants? You have a duty to be honest before the court. You're supposed to basically work against each other, but not hit each other below the belt. That's exactly what the Democrats do all the time. So they admit it. Norm Eisen has to step in and correct her, but honestly, they just put up with it. That's how they operate, like addicts. But while all this is happening, we have another message from Chad Bianco, the sheriff who is now taking criminal charges into his own hands, bypassing the oversight of the California Attorney General's office, which is trying to prevent a final investigation into this. And here's what he said last night on One America News, the sheriff from Riverside, California.
Yes, it's very, very simple and clear, and I don't know what it is. Is it funny or alarming? That's the reaction you should expect since the Attorney General and Secretary of State are nervous. They don't want this, but it's very simple. We have records provided by the Registrar of Voters themselves, which said we had X number of ballots, but at the same time, the machines produced over 45,000 more ballots than they originally said there were. And it's very simple, and you're absolutely right about what I said.
This is a fact-finding mission. I'm not saying this is fraud. I'm saying there's a huge discrepancy between what the Registrar of Voters said they had and what was reported.
In general, you already understand that the Democrats are rigging things, and then they do everything they can to make sure no one can check it. When the committee investigating the unarmed takeover of Capitol Hill suddenly ordered all documents and all interviews to be erased from the computer, basically all the information on which they based their conclusions, like that Trump supposedly tried to stay in power by armed, illegal means. So now only the report exists. Well, nobody knows what the report is based on. But they say, I swear on my mother, that absolutely everything in this report is 100% true, and if you don't believe it, you're a meanie, a carrot, a radish, and a nettle. Gentlemen, I'm sure that interesting events coming thick and fast will happen tomorrow and the day after as well. So until our next meeting, see you soon. Write in the comments what you want to hear, what you agree with, what you disagree with. I usually read the comments a few hours after the video is released and try to respond and reply. So if you write something within the first 2, 3, or 4 hours after the release, I'll most likely see it. That's it. Goodbye. Thank you for coming and listening. I hope we'll meet again pretty soon.